remote land. We got a room that sits about 700 and we got about 50 in here maybe, and people are starting to come in after lunch. Give us another minute or two and then we'll get started. Yeah, next time we're going to ask for the biggest room. So what I fear, Paul, actually, is that we'll get a small room when we go to Vancouver and there'll be a lot of people there. Yes. Oh. Look at that. All right, one more minute and then we'll get started. Hey, Drew, could you turn the video off unless you're going to be speaking? Thanks. We've also been photo or video bombed by multiple people, so appreciate that. All right, 2 minutes after. Hey, are you trying to get in on the game? Thank you. Hey, IETF 119 DULT, Detecting Unwanted Location Trackers Working Group. Yay. We're in the security area. This is Thursday of the IETF, so if you've been around for the whole week, you'll have seen many of these slides before, so we may go through them quickly, but for those in remote land, you may not have. So this is the note well. Basically, this is if you have any, if you know about IPR, if you see something, say something. Additional rules about working group procedures and processes and anti-harassment procedures, et cetera. Copy and patent right stuff. If you have any questions, you can ask the chairs, you can ask the area directors, you can ask other people that have been around for a while. We'll let you know. This is the note really well. This is down to the professional conduct kind of stuff. Treat everybody with respect. You don't have to like their idea, but you need to be polite to them at the microphone or online or wherever we're interacting. Some meeting tips for in-person participants. Please make sure to scan the QR code or log in via the data tracker to make sure that we get an appropriately sized room for next time. As I said to some people, this is a massive room. There's like 700 seats and there might be 50 people in here. My concern is that when we go back to Vancouver, we're going to get a small room and 150 people like we did in San Francisco. So for whatever we can do to goose it, make sure you please sign in here. Also, we're going to use the meeting tool to get in and out of the queue. So will be fair to the remote participants to make sure we manage it that way. So if you're going to get to the queue, you need to be logged in so you can press the button. For remote participants, please make sure your audio and video are off. Well, I love dogs and cats and police cars flying by. I don't really want to hear it during the meeting, and try to stop from the video bombing us as well. And we'd like, if you could, to use a headset if you're in a noisy place. But again, when you talk, you can come off. That's fine. And again, for the remote presenters, I can run the slides or you can run the slides however you want to do it. All right, some additional resources. It's Thursday. I don't know that we need to spend too much time on these. Here's our agenda. We're doing some administrivia right now. This is the kind of note well. I put the scribe selection in here to remind me to ask someone to scribe notes. We do not need a play-by-play of all of the things that are said, but we do need kind of like the high-level action points that get taken and some flavor around what people are saying at the microphone. Can I get a volunteer? Oh, hey, Mike, Cheapers, great, thanks, man. I owe you many more beers. We're also going to do some introductions. We're kind of merging two communities here into one. We're all going to be in this together, and so I think we wanted to do a little bit of introductions because some of you may not know me, and a bunch of IETFers might not know Erica. So we kind of want to do that, and I thought this would be interesting. And then I saw the Whimsy working group, who just got chartered this time, do it, and I thought, oh, that's really pretty great. So same thing. And then we got some presentations where we got Maggie Delano and Jesse Lowell and talk about unwanted tracking scenarios and implications for the DULT protocol design. And then Sadiqa is going to do some state of the current internet draft and internet implementations. And then Brent's going to do some suggestions on how to start the working group internet draft process. I've uploaded all the slides, so you can download them now if you want to read ahead. But let's get going. So introductions. Hey, it's me. I volunteered to do this. I thought it would be kind of fun. I've been coming to the IETF since 36, so for a little while now. I've chaired a number of pretty contentious working groups, and I think that's maybe why they picked me. I've also shepherded some newer working group chairs along. And some of these times there were during some contentious periods where we had to develop some protocols in which we knifed fight at the microphone, hoping it won't come to that. Primarily, I've been doing work in the SEC area, but also in art and wit. Now, Roman, did you want to do an AD interrupt or chair interrupt, depending on how you look at it?
I just wanted to step in and say a profound thank you to you and Erica for chairing this important working group. And I'm so glad that we are at a working group and we can be having this conversation, but thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Erica, I'm going to move the slide over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Olson. I am started as a social worker. I've been in the victim services field doing different things for 20 years, just over 20 years. About 18 of those have been working at the intersection of technology and victim services. I currently am at the National Network on Domestic Violence at a project that looks specifically at technology, how abusers misuse technology as a tactic of abuse for stalking, sexual assault, domestic violence, trafficking, but also at how survivors strategically use technology to increase their privacy, to maintain their safety. And for the last 10 years or so, we've been sitting on a bunch of advisory boards, working with tech companies around design and really thinking through the scenarios of domestic violence, intimate partner abuse, and how that changes concepts of safety and privacy and security. So that's my background in this space. A few years back, we started talking about Bluetooth trackers. And all the ways that we were seeing them impact survivors. A couple of years ago, we started working with some other organizations, CDT, and others, really to think about what could be done about this and to come up with some ideas about a standardization. And now we get to be here. And I just want to say, first and foremost, I am very, very excited for this conversation. And go to the next slide. Here we go. Thank you. Here we go. And in this conversation, it is really exciting because as Shauna said, we are bringing two different fields of expertise together, and the goal here is for us to work together to really develop and advocate for meaningful solutions that can lessen the harms associated with the misuse of Bluetooth tracking devices. That is our goal. We are merging these fields of expertise. We've got a lot of gender-based violence advocates who are very familiar with the technology, familiar with the scenarios that they're seeing, or are excited to share that experience, and also people who have been sitting in both spaces as experts in gender-based violence, but also technologists. And I'm looking forward to learning from everybody and being part of this conversation. So I will leave it there because I know we have lots of conversations, but I'm very excited that we're finally here.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I want to add, like at a 10,000 foot level, is there are products in this space. You can like them or hate them. We're not here to hate on the people that are here to try to make the process better or make the products better. So we don't really want people to get at the line and rail against company XYZ or product XYZ. That's not going to be helpful. So I just kind of throw that out there, and I'm going to squash that pretty hard if people get to the microphone and attempt to do that. So just a kind of command override. I just want to give you a heads up. I'm actually not watching the chat room while I'm here. So if anybody needs anything that's in the chat room relayed, if you could put MIC and then the colon and then what you want relayed to the mic, and hopefully somebody in here is looking at it and we'll run up to the microphone and can do that for us. I think that's it. I think that the other summary of how this is work is we're going to rely on Erica's Rolodex, and I'm going to try to make sure that the IETF process goes as smoothly as possible. And then we'll both learn from each other a little bit and we'll go from there. And without further ado, unless anybody wants to bash the agenda, we're going to just get into it. All right, so first deck. So Maggie or Jesse, who is going to present? All right, I see a face. Yeah, you can both come off, just kind of manage how you want to do the thing and go to it. Can you, if you need me to move the slides forward, just say next slide and I'll hit the button.
Sure. Okay, yeah, so I'm Maggie and there's Jesse. We'll introduce ourselves in a second. So today we're going to be talking about unwanted tracking scenarios and some of the implications based on these scenarios for the protocol design that we're all going to be working on. So next slide, please. So just a little bit about us. I'm Maggie Delno, they, them pronouns. I'm an associate professor of engineering at Swarthmore College, which is outside Philadelphia in the United States. My background is in analog circuit design and medical devices, particularly embedded systems type stuff. So I use a lot of Bluetooth devices just in my research. And so when the Apple AirTags came out, I started doing a little bit more research about kind of preventing stalking. And so this is kind of how I got into this area. And so I've done a little bit of research, particularly around AirTags that I'll talk about later. And so I'll turn it over to Jesse now.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Maggie. My name's Jessie. My pronouns are either they, them, or she, her, and I'm based on the East Coast of the United States, where it is a very different time of day than it is in Brisbane. I am a technology safety specialist at the Safety Net Project, which is Erica's team at the National Network to End Domestic Violence. I have a PhD in computer science from Brandeis University, albeit in not a particularly related field to this one. And I have spent years both as a volunteer and then as full-time staff doing direct service with survivors in different programs, including being staff during the height of the pandemic at a local LGBTQ-focused domestic violence program. I also, during that time, had a side consulting job going in digital privacy and security. That's how I got into this space of being in tech safety and how it intersects with gender-based violence. And from there, if we can go to the next slide.
All right, there we go.
So our talk outline has a few different sections. The first thing we want to do is talk a little bit about the motivation for this presentation. And then after that, we'll talk about some scenarios, as well as then the limitations of existing protections and proposed next steps. So next slide. So let's start with some motivation. In order for the DULT protocol to be successful, the working group's going to need an understanding of what the unwanted tracking landscape today currently looks like. And that means from a technological perspective, but it also means from the perspective of the people who are being affected by this unwanted tracking and the people who work directly with them and advocate for them. So in the interest of that, I know that I know that threat modeling and risk modeling are very familiar concepts to a lot of people in tech. And one thing that we've found is that people are often very familiar with the concept of threat modeling, but they don't necessarily have the experience in thinking through gender-based violence scenarios that would help them to be able to threat model adequately for this kind of purpose. And so in the interest of that, we'll share common unwanted tracking scenarios, and we'll also share the limitations of current protocols. Our presentation aims to contribute to several different working group goals, including threat analysis, including documentation of the current state of tracker accessory platforms, and then also standards track protocol and guidance for preventing unwanted tracking. Next slide. So common unwanted tracking scenarios involving Bluetooth trackers. In this, I'm going to talk through some scenarios, and then I'm also going to share some actual feedback that we've heard in the field, not for the purpose of this working group needs to respond to this feedback right away, but for purposes of illustrating what the issues look like to people being directly affected. Next slide. So some background on the scenarios. The confidentiality requirements for U.S. laws that fund survivor services are very strict, and so there's no actual identifying info in these scenarios. They are composite cases that I wrote based on my experience working with survivors myself, with hearing reports from the field, also providing case consultations with community programs. And so these are, I wrote these, they're composite cases, and I wrote them to illustrate several different angles of the problem. Not only technological angles, but angles that are meant to provide realistic insight into survivors' constraints, because as with any tech, like, we can't forget about the human factor, about the user experience, about what things are actually like for users who are usually lay people. And so with that, I'll get into the first scenario. Next slide, please. So scenario 1, abuser plants location tracker on child. So Malka and Anna have 2 young children. Malka left because Anna was abusive. She was homeless for a month, and the children have been living with Anna. She now has an apartment 2 towns away. She does not want Anna to know where it is, but she does want to see the children. So she and Anna meet at a public playground. She gets there early so that Anna will not see which bus route she arrived on, and keeps playing with the children on the playground until after Anna leaves, so that Anna will not see which bus route they get on. But 2 days later, Anna shows up at Malka's door, pounding on the door and shouting. So some thoughts about the scenario and why I put it in here. Co-parenting situations where an abuser and a survivor are co-parenting are very common, and we've had lots of reports from the field over time about abusers using kids as an opportunity to introduce tech-facilitated stalking in general, including to introduce location trackers. I worked in a program where I was working primarily with survivors who had just relocated or were fleeing, and so I definitely drew from my experiences with that, as well as having been the open source intelligence lead for a while at Operation Safe Escape, which also works with survivors. Next scenario, or next slide. Scenario 2. Survivor has reason to think there might be a location tracker, but cannot find it. Sophia and Edward live together. Sophia has noticed that Edward has become excessively jealous. Every time she goes to visit a friend by herself, he accuses her of cheating on him. To her alarm, over the last week, on multiple occasions, he has somehow known which friend she visited at any given time and has started to harass them. She eventually gets a notification that a tracker is traveling with her, and she thinks it might be in her car, but she cannot find it. She lives in a car-dependent area and cannot visit friends without the car. And Edward controls all of their money, so she cannot take the car to the mechanic without him knowing. And so the part of the point of this scenario, as indicated by the title, is that people can't always physically find the trackers, even when they know they're there. Objects like cars are very large, complex vehicles, and so, you know, it's not always easy to figure out exactly where something has been planted. Another reason that I put this scenario in is because this is also an example of a situation where the tracker may be in a near owner state, which is a reference to the proposed protocol from the folks at Apple and Google, where a tracker could be in a near owner state or a separated state. And this is a situation where, because they live together, the tracker may be in a near owner state most of the time. This is common in cases where abusers and survivors live together, and I think it's important to realize that people do engage in unwanted tracking to someone they live with sometimes. It can be used as a way to prevent them from leaving, among other things. So that's another angle to think through. Next slide, please. Scenario 3, and this is a tricky one. Survivor cannot use tech to scan for a location tracker or to receive alerts. Hao Yu and Ming have been dating for 2 years. Ming works for a tech company and often emphasizes how much more he knows about technology than Hao Yu, who works at a restaurant. He insists on having access to Hao Yu's computer and Android phone so that he can make sure they are working well and that there are no dangerous apps. Ming hits Hao Yu when he's angry and has threatened to out him as gay to his conservative parents and report him to Immigration and Customs Enforcement if Hao Yu talks back to him. Hao Yu met with an advocate at a local domestic violence program, talk about going to their shelter once a bed was available. The advocate did some safety planning with Hao Yu and mentioned during that there is an app for Android that can scan for location trackers. But Hao Yu did not feel safe installing this app because Ming would see it. The next time Hao Yu went to see the advocate, he chose a time when he knew Ming had to be at work until late to make sure that he did not follow him. But when Ming got home from work, he knew where Hao Yu had been. So this is a difficult one because it is a case where the abuser has a high level of tech knowledge. This is especially common in regions and ethnic or cultural communities that have a very high percentage of tech workers. It's also a difficult one because there is an app that Hao Yu would potentially be able to use, except he can't safely install it. And an abuser having a lot of ability to see what a survivor is doing with their tech is very common. in abusive relationships. It's also a case where how you, the survivor, is undocumented and he might not feel comfortable involving law enforcement. And that means that privileges that police have in investigation and requesting records from companies might not apply in a situation like that. So in some sense, this scenario is kind of a hard mode one. I meant it to capture some very realistic dynamics, but it's also just tricky. And one thing I want to note about all these scenarios is that in each case, the survivor was doing things to try to take precautions, but there was something there were still barriers and reasons that the precautions didn't end up working the way they wanted. And I know that these can sound like edge cases.
Oops, I think we. Jesse, I think you're breaking up. We lost you as soon as you said this might sound like they might be edge use cases. Uh-oh, now we lost your audio completely, unfortunately. Maggie, can you jump in here?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Sorry, Jesse. You can try talking again. You back? No. Okay.
No, we can see we can see your lips moving. We can't hear anything.
Okay. Okay. So this is the last slide of Jesse's, so I'll do this one. Yeah. So before I tell this, I just wanted to mention that these quotes are courtesy of the Clinic to End Tech Abuse at Cornell Tech, which are interviews with permission. So we were talking a little bit about the kind of feedback that people have gotten, and this is just intended to be some example feedback, not something that has to be addressed right away. But so some of the questions that we've gotten are, if I get an alert for an AirTag, how long has it been following me? Where can I see this? Is there a way to find an AirTag tracker immediately before someone enters a certain place, for example? Can I find out who owns a tracker if I can't physically find it? And it would be helpful to have an explanation about why certain values are chosen in the draft protocol. So for example, there's a between 8 to 24 hours window that's used when a device is separated before a notification is issued. And it's not clear how that window size was chosen. Okay, so you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so now we're going to talk a little bit. You might have some idea of what some of the limitations of existing protections might be, but we'll kind of get more into the tech angle as well to talk about that. So next slide, please. So one of the kind of big takeaways from these scenarios is that we need both ability to actively scan for trackers, but also passively scan for trackers and be alerted when a tracker might be nearby. And in terms of like some concrete constraints that we have to keep in mind while we're designing the protocol, if you keep in mind that people might not be able to install software, so it might be helpful, for example, if something's built into the operating system, people's accounts might be compromised, and so they might not have privacy. And also people might not own a smartphone or have a way to otherwise engage with the use a platform to prevent the tracking. Next slide, please. And so in terms of the current unwanted tracking landscape, I basically picked like 4 popular brands of trackers. And this table kind of summarizes the kind of affordances that those have today. So Apple AirTags, for example, use the Find My network. And right now they have these passive scanning. So these alerts that come up that are available both on Android and on iOS. But in terms of active scanning, that's only currently available on Android. Then with Tile is another one very popular tracker that has existed even before AirTags. That uses Tile uses their own network. They have active scanning, but no passive scanning available right now. Chipolo is a tracker that uses the Find My network, and it only has passive scanning available on iOS. And then Samsung has their own network as well, and they focus on active scanning. So we can see that kind of the whole point of this working group is to come up with some sort of standardization. But as part of that, I think one of the things that I want to emphasize is that it's really important that that standardization includes both passive scanning and active scanning on major operating systems. That's my own opinion. Next slide, please. And so just to talk a little bit about some example limitations, and as Sean said, I'm not here to pick on Apple or on AirTags. I just chose them as an example because that's the research that I've done, and they're also a very popular tracker. And so I'll talk a little bit about the lack of scanning, for, active scanning for AirTags on iOS, and then also a little bit about lack of customization, particularly for passive scanning. Next slide, please. So if someone does want to actively scan their environment for a Bluetooth tracker, one of the things that you can do is you can download a third-party Bluetooth scanning app. So the app that I'm showing the screenshots from is the NRF Connect app, which I actually use all the time in my research. And when you scan in a busy urban area, there could be, even more than 100 devices that might come up on the Bluetooth, and each of the devices kind of look like the picture shown there. And it turns out that certain types of location trackers can be very easily identified because they have a name associated with them. So for example, tiles can be very easily found and filtered on iOS or on Android by just searching, scrolling or typing in tile and filtering, and you can see that there's a tile there. You can also see the signal strength and the advertisement interval. And in this case, although there would be no ultra wideband way to help you find it, you could know that there was a tile near you, which could still potentially be useful. Next slide, please. However, AirTags are much more difficult to uniquely identify, especially on iOS. So AirTags don't have a Bluetooth name associated with them, so they show up as an N/A. Lots of other devices also show up as N/As. So just it being an N/A doesn't really tell you anything. So if you're trying to figure out if there's something near you that shouldn't be, the only thing that you have to rely on is the signal strength or the advertisement interval. And again, the advertisement interval isn't necessarily unique to an Apple product. Lots of things could advertise at 2 seconds if they wanted to. But the signal strength is maybe somewhat of a good indicator, although it really depends on the scenario. If it's kind of in a car or if it's in your house, it might not be right near you. And again, without ultra wideband, it's hard to find a device. However, one of the unique things about iOS in particular is that it actually does not even have access to the manufacturer information. So if you knew that it was an Apple product, that might allow you to narrow down from these hundreds of devices, find one that's an AirTag. And it turns out actually that this is exactly the way that third-party active scanning apps on Android work. So, but on iOS, that data is not available. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So this is just to show you what's missing. So on the left-hand side is basically the Bluetooth logs that are dumped from an app that I wrote. That just basically shows the advertisement data that is collected when you scan for these different devices. So with an AirTag, we're basically missing what's called the KCB advertisement data manufacturer data. So it is being stripped. So third parties don't have access to that information, which makes it just slightly harder for people to find AirTags on iOS without relying on built-in iOS, which right now is only passive. So there's no active way to do this. And just for comparison, you can see with the Bose SoundLink on the bottom, there's this 9-byte long advertisement manufacturer data that is available. And one of the interesting things, I'd be interested to hear why, is that the manufacturer data, there's nothing secret about it. It's fully relatively available on Android and on Mac. It's just that for some reason it's not available on iOS. Next slide, please. So in terms of addressing this, and again, this is just an example of one of the things that we could potentially incorporate into the standard, is the idea that the advertised manufacturer data should be available to third-party developers, and especially if it's not going to be available to third-party developers, then active scanning should be implemented by the operating system. Again, there's some discussion about what we can require platforms to do, but I think this is really important, and we should talk about a way to encourage, if not require it, to comply with the standard. Okay, next slide, please. The other thing I just wanted to mention is some of the limitations around the lack of customization. So right now, if the passive scanning is implemented on an operating system, there isn't any way to customize your settings. And besides family sharing, so you can kind of like snooze an AirTag, so you don't get notifications for your spouse's AirTag if you don't want to. But outside of that, there's not a lot of customization. So you can imagine that customization would be very useful if you want to be more stringent or if you want to be less stringent. And just like as a point of reference, I tracked myself driving from Philadelphia to Boston, and I only received an alert hours after I already arrived, and it's about a 6-hour drive. So you can imagine, like with one of the scenarios Jesse talked about, that could lead to a very unsafe situation for someone because they've been tracked for that entire duration. In terms of like some ideas that we could think about for customization, you could think about decreasing or increasing the traveling with you duration before a passive notification. You could think about decreasing or increasing the number of sounds before a device goes dormant, or sending a notification each time a sound is played. So right now on an AirTag, it plays a sound 10 times, and then after that, it kind of goes dormant. And I think we can also talk about smart defaults as a way to avoid false positives, like while respecting autonomy of individuals who might be concerned about their safety. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about what we think some ideas for next steps are, and look forward to hear what everyone else thinks. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we think it was really important to generate additional scenarios based on real-world experiences. So Jesse's scenarios are a great starting point, but there's lots of other ones that we could imagine as well. And I think what's really important then is to kind of take these scenarios and then use them to evaluate the affordances of the existing tracking approaches, the passive and active implementations that we have today, and how they address the real world scenarios, and then use that to inform the development of requirements for the algorithms accordingly. So basically really tying the requirements of the algorithms to the scenarios, because right now I think it's hard to evaluate the draft protocol without understanding the kinds of scenarios that we're trying to address. And one of the things that we didn't really talk about in our presentation, but that has been brought up since, is also the idea that we need to understand a little bit more about what kind of adversary we're trying to protect against. And that's something that should also be considered. And then kind of the last thing that came up as Jesse and I were talking about was kind of like a specific thing, which is thinking about the affordances of the near owner state and whether or not that makes sense, especially in an active scanning kind of scenario. Okay, and I think just acknowledgements is last. So I just want to thank Lana Ramjit, Nick Doty, Alessis Hancock, and Andrew Crawford for their input. And Jesse and I are happy to take questions if we have time.
All right, the queue has started already. Great. So let's just jump in there. Juan Carlos? Sorry, I got new glasses. I can barely read my screen.
Hi, Juan Carlos Zúñiga. Thanks a lot, Maggie and Jesse, for the nice presentation. Very, very interesting and a lot of good information. So this is a very dear topic to me, and I happen to work on the Wi-Fi arena, and already for a few years we've been dealing with similar issues regarding tracking and unwanted tracking, and because of that we started changing MAC address to MAC address randomization, because Wi-Fi used to be a very easy way to identify and track users that unwantedly. It started being misused for advertisement, but also for some other purposes. Nowadays, we have evolved the 802.11 specifications. We are pushing for MAC address randomization, and we are actively looking at ways to make it harder, because we realize that it's not only about just randomizing the MAC address. There's a whole bunch of things that have to happen at the same time. You cannot just change the address at some point in time. You have to change. Potentially, right now we're discussing MAC addresses at multiple times, or for a group of people at the same time, so that we avoid identifying who is changing the MAC address. I guess my point, coming back to your presentation, is that here in the IETF, I would like to not go one technology at a time, but do something a little more generic, that we can provide good guidelines for stopping or basically helping not only for one specific technology, because I see this happening in the past for Wi-Fi, now for Bluetooth, perhaps in the future for ultra wideband, then narrowband, then it's going to be near field communications, and then we would need to repeat this every 2-3 years.
So Juan Carlos, I just want to jump in here, is that we do have a charter, and so we have to kind of follow that at the beginning, and I think we have to get something done, and that's kind of the point. Like,
and the charter restricts us to Bluetooth?
I think it restricts us to Bluetooth, if I'm correct, right?
Okay, so I would challenge that a little bit.
Okay, fair enough.
And at least if that is the way we start, that's fair enough, but I would like to see that.
So I think you're right on a broad scale, but in the short term, I think we have to make sure we stay
Okay,
with
but
what's in the charter.
fair enough. If we keep that as a short-term view, but I would not like to miss the long term, because again, this is something that the technology is faster than the IETF, and if we want to be meaningful, I think we should look at the big picture. Thank you.
All right, next is Tommy Polly.
All right, Tommy Polly Apple. So as Juan Carlos said, thank you to Maggie and Jesse for sharing. This definitely good to kick off with this context. Yeah, with regards to the charter, I think we are not just Bluetooth here, but it is scoped to like location trackers. Yeah. So it is narrowly scoped, but like we can define payloads that work on other transports other than Bluetooth. So that's good. The comment I came up here for was regarding some of the comments made about what is exposed to third-party apps and APIs on OS. So first, while I'm at Apple trying to help the effort along, I'm not on the AirTags team, so like I don't know the details there or why that's not exposed. No idea, no context. But as someone who works on other APIs and considering like what we expose to third parties, sometimes there are privacy reasons where we're trying to stop third-party apps from being malicious in tracking a user's location, and that's why some of the information is bleached. So when we are specifying things here, and I think we would figure this out as a working group, but I don't think we should be trying to encode in any standard operating systems need to expose these particular types of APIs to apps. That's usually not what we would do. Instead, we need to put requirements on what needs to be possible to be done by these apps, and that particular boundary of how that information is gathered can be a bit more fuzzy and a bit more platform dependent. So let's try to describe things in terms of what capabilities need to be had. Maybe the third-party app says, I am looking for this particular manufacturer, tell me if you find that one, as opposed to giving me every manufacturer around me. So just things like that.
Tommy Polly, that reminds me of when Murray used to get to the microphone, and when he worked at Meta, he's like, I'm not here to solve your particular profile problem. So thanks for the warning. We won't run to you with our Apple iOS problems. Next, Chris.
Chris Rishak, Independent. I just was thinking about additional scenarios and how some of the scenarios have been laid out. One concern is that maybe we should actually reach out more to people in other parts of the world, especially Global South, because maybe there are cultural elements that we are not considering, and they might perhaps overlap with existing scenarios, but they might also help us identify additional scenarios.
I think someone else asked that in the chat, and I think that now that we're chartered as a working group, I think we'll probably get scenarios from all over the place. Bob?
Hello. My point here is on the defense side against these devices, to be careful of talking about jamming as a defense, because the civil aviation agencies around the world are mandating remote ID to run over Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and thus, if you jam these frequencies, you can then get into regulation violation of first responders needing to know what's up in the air.
So, Bob, I think
it's not talking about these things there.
I just want to let you know, I don't think anyone.
No one's brought up
as a defense.
Okay, fine. Yeah. It was mentioned. I did see one comment of that in the chat, and that's why I said that. That's what kind of brought my alertness to. But that's the comment in the chat. Fine. Yeah. That's my only concern, and I'll be quiet.
Okay, great. You're on.
You're on, Chef. Speaking directly to Chris's point before, the analysis in the slides focused on Android and iOS, which is good for an initial analysis. But there are large communities of people where people are actively discouraged from having smartphones. So no Android, no iOS, and we should think about these people as well.
Melanie?
Yeah, Nalini Elkins. This is actually, I'm glad about the comments about the global south, because we have been doing a bunch of studies in India with location trackers, and one of the problems happens is that we got a tile and whatever they are, $20 or whatever in the U.S. With the rupee being 80 rupees to the dollar, it's completely unaffordable to most people in India. And so we couldn't find a location tracking network at all. It was super interesting because we started looking at, we have a lot of Windows devices. People have smartphones, but they don't have the location tracking apps because we don't have those kind of things. We can certainly bring some of that work in if you guys want. We can probably, Bangalore Airport might be one place where we might find something like that, or Mumbai Airport, but certainly in regular towns, we just don't have them.
Ecker?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. You in earlier slides, which you identified a number of sort of issues with the current environment. Do you have a sense? So some of those issues, it seems like, are ones that have straightforward solutions that you point to, and perhaps there's some issues that do not have straightforward solutions. Do you have a sense of like what the envelope is of what things we could do that we sort of are well understood to improve the current situation versus what things actually we do not understand and like are hard problems we have to kind of attack. And maybe you don't, in which case we should take it up later. But I think it'd be helpful to understand, to what extent we're kind of documenting things that are sort of well understood, and to what extent we're actually having to like really think through hard engineering problems. Thank you.
I mean, I guess I would just say that for me, like I've read the draft standard and I've given feedback on it, but I think it's just really hard to assess it because there is no clear threat model that's described in that document. So if the authors of that document had one in mind, I don't know what it is. So I just think that, like, I feel like I can't really say. I mean, I have some of my own opinions, and then we have like the scenarios, but I think we need to flesh out the scenarios a lot more. I mean, incorporating the comments that people made about global south and different networks and different technologies and all of that before we can really say. But I mean, I don't think that the kinds of things that we're trying to do are insurmountable, technically difficult. I think that it just requires a good understanding of the threat model in order to design something that's going to be most impactful. If anything, I actually think active scanning is easier to do than passive scanning, and we already have something that works with passive scanning, right? I think it's a matter of honing what we already have, and then making sure that there's coverage across varieties of different areas, and then kind of figuring out how we're going to navigate the situation about whether or not you're going to require an operating system to do it or let a third party do it. I don't know about that, but I think that's something we need to figure out.
All right, so we've drained the queue. I just want to, Juan Carlos, I would like to apologize. I've been corrected. Mike Unsworth said that in the charter, it does include Bluetooth and near field communications, etc. So we'll be hitting them all. Thumbs up. All right, cool. I want to thank Maggie and Jesse for volunteering. I don't know if they were volunteering or voluntold, but we're going to try to figure out how to document this stuff. This is not the royal we. Somebody's going to have to put pen to paper or hands to keyboards. And I think thank the two of you for volunteering to help write this stuff. So we'll make sure we get tooled up in the GitHub repo to get something going, and we'll figure out how to do that and the best way to do that so that we can gather scenarios and then figure out which ones are in scope and out of scope and go from there. So thank you very much. I don't know, Erica, did you want to add anything?
No, I would just also say thank you, just to repeat that. This is a great conversation, but I'll allow us, go right into the next presentations. Thank you.
All right, Sadiqa. State of the internet. There we go. I got the right one. All right, I'm up. Just tell me when you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Everyone can hear me, I hope.
Yep, sounds great.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Siddika Parlak Polatkan. I'm a software engineer at Google. And I'm one of the authors of the existing draft. So today I will talk about the state of the current draft and initial implementations and platforms. Next slide, please. Okay, so a quick outline. I'll give an overview of the current draft, then deep dive into some of the key pieces, and touch a bit on the implementation support on Android and iOS. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of a timeline. Last year in May, Google and Apple jointly submitted the first version of this draft. In the coming months, we got some feedback, mostly over the GitHub repo that we had, and incorporated some of the feedback and submitted a new version in December. Also, I'd like to highlight that this will be this is basically the version that Android and iOS are referring to for the cross-platform support. Obviously, thanks to the interest in the community, now that a working group is set up in March, and we are excited to be here today at the first meeting. Next slide, please. So I will go into the key pieces a little bit, but first I wanted to show in this block diagram how kind of these pieces are coming together into the big picture. So obviously here in this tracker's journey, the very first thing that happens is this tracker. This is a location Bluetooth tracker that is paired to an owner device that you see on the top, and enrolls into a tracking network, and this allows the owner of the tracker to be able to see its location. Now, if the owner is far away, now we are at the bottom of this, like the bottom half of this block diagram, where the tracker is in the separated mode. And the first thing that happens is it starts broadcast its presence in the separated mode. If the tracker is moving with someone else's phone, this person can be a victim of unwanted tracking. On their device, the unwanted tracking algorithm will pick up the signal, and that's what the third block shows here. And next comes the alerting and other actions that the user can take. For example, they see an alert, they see what kind of tracker this is, they see potentially a picture, a name. They can see what other actions are possible, for example, playing sound, how to disable this tracker, some other actions, meaningful actions that the user can take to get out of this situation, basically. These are really boxes 4, 5, 6, 7. I guess most of them are covered with this. Yeah, on the table on the right, you are seeing whether these, like what these blocks are doing, along with whether they are in scope or not. So in scope here means mostly in scope of the working group. The draft currently has some of these pieces, not all of them, and I will also get into detail of that. Next slide, please. Okay, so quick look at the advertisement header. So we said in the separated mode, the tracker will start advertising its presence. And this is the header format that we have currently in the draft. So it has a MAC address, optional flags. It has a service data TLV, with a value of FCB2, which is newly created for this spec. So whenever a service.tlv is scanned with this value, we actually know that it's a device that is adhering to this spec. Obviously, another important one is the near owner bit, also known as the separated bit. Transitioning into the separated bit requires the accessory to be not detectable by the owner for more than 30 minutes. And currently, additional condition of location reporting to the owner device is also acceptable. And the rest is basically company-specific payload data. Next slide, please. A bit more on the MAC address. So this is a 6-byte Bluetooth MAC address. It should be recognizable by the owner device, but should look random to everyone else, basically. The owner device must be able to predict the coming MAC address in order to suppress unwanted tracking alerts that might be caused by the device's owned accessory. And the MAC address should rotate periodically. In the near owner state, rotation is every 15 minutes. And in the separated state, it should rotate its address every 24 hours. In separated state is much longer. This duration allows unwanted tracking algorithms to detect the same accessory over some period of time and basically trigger an alert. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's say the algorithms detected a potential malicious use and send an alert. What does this include and what can the user do with this? It takes us to the non-owner interface and actions. So this is defined via a get service and characteristic over LE. And again, this is a newly defined service and characteristic for basically this spec. What you can see in the table as capabilities are basically the bits that are exposed through this service, and they can be read using different opcodes. For example, manufacturer and model names are useful to platforms so that in the alert they can show what kind of a tag this is, what's the manufacturer, what's the model. So it will show relevant information to the user. Accessory capabilities, again, are useful for example, if it's a NFC supported accessory, the next steps in the UI can be adjusted based on that. Versus if it supports identifier lookup via BLE, next steps might be different. So again, these are all showing useful information to the user. Of course, a very crucial functionality here is play sound. Since trackers are usually small and hidden, we need to provide a way for the user to find the tracker, one of which is play sound. And we have read identifier capability over BLE. Obviously, this is for the devices that support identifier lookup via BLE only. I have a bit more on this on the next slide, actually, if we can go to the next slide. Yeah. So the accessory must have a way to uniquely identify it. In some cases, this could be just a serial number that is printed on the tag, but there could be other ways, like identifier retrieval can be available over NFC tab or Bluetooth LE. And for the accessories that support identifier lookup over Bluetooth LE, an additional physical interaction is required. For example, a button press will actually enable the retrieval, identifier retrieval over Bluetooth. The reason of this design is to avoid a situation that a bypasser actually or someone very close to you can read an identifier through basically connection. And once the identifier is found, some kind of owner information can be displayed to the user. It can be either a phone number, last 4 digits of the phone number, or an obfuscated email address, as you can see in the screen here. Next slide, please. So these were kind of the key pieces that we had in the draft. One thing that's work in progress is onboarding process. So there is actually a little bit of information already, but likely we will be adding more. So onboarding process is the goal of the onboarding process is to create a product registry so that manufacturers can register their products to this registry, and information like disablement instructions, how identifier lookup can be performed, etc. And this will enable those devices to be detectable by platforms. Yeah, out of scope for this draft, for this version of the draft, again, can be a goal, obviously, for the working group. And Brent will talk about that in a little bit. Crowdsourcing network specifics, unwanted tracking detection algorithm and platform specifics, and also network specific details, such as how the owner information is shown to the user, for example. These are out of scope of the current draft. Next slide, please. Okay. This is the last slide. So what is being implemented on platforms right now? Apple and Google teams are working on implementing the V01 version of the draft, latest version of the draft in their platforms. And when available, again, manufacturers would need to complete the onboarding process to make their accessories detectable by these platforms. That's all I have. Happy to take any questions, and thank you.
Mr. Farrell.
Hi, Stephen Farrell. Just to clarify, there was a lot of the same information presented at the BOF. What's kind of different now, or is it more or less just the same? And in which case, that's fine, because this is the first meeting. But just, is there stuff in there that's changed or not?
So before we pushed submitted the latest version in December, we had made some changes. Could be minimal, though. I believe BOF meeting was in November.
Yeah.
That's the one you're referring to, right? Yeah. So it could be minimal in that case.
Okay, so fair enough. I mean, if you knew which bits to point at and say that bit was new, that might be useful for people who are at the BOF. But again, it's early days, so that's fine if not.
Hold on. Let me. I dropped the link in the draft. You can do a div. Yeah, Tommy Pauly.
All right, Tommy Pauly, Apple, and for the purpose of this, extensibility enthusiast. So I appreciate that we have this draft that you're using for essentially like the initial implementations while we get to work on the standard version of that. And I know the next presentation will kind of try to talk about what direction we want to do to have the standard work. But when we look at specific things like the format here for like the Bluetooth payload, and we have like the service ID that's been allocated for that you guys are using for this version, what do we think the story for that going forward is? Like, to what degree can the rest of the payload and other things change while still using that service identifier? Do we have that type of resiliency? Do we expect that we'll have a separate identifier for the final DULT RFC product? And along the way, if people are trying to build tests of interoperable versions of intermediate things, which probably, like Apple and Google, big networks would never support, but it'd be used for experimentation along the way before we get to the final thing. what service ID do they use? Do we have thoughts there?
So in terms of the service ID itself, there is support for some back compatibility that is specified in the draft. It's if that's what you are referring to. Again, the format of the packet, I guess it depends on whether it makes sense to include that information in the identifier and what would be the reason to change the service data value. I'm not aware of any intention of or any reason at this point to change the service data value. Again, because of the reason back compatibility is kind of provided. And any other bits, I guess this is all open to discussion, right? That's why kind of we are here.
Cool. I see Brent is in queue. I don't know if that's to help respond to this.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So Brent, you're up, Brent.
Great. Yeah, it was to help respond. So Tommy, I think we have a choice if we want to use the service data TLV UUID value. There's probably reasons why we'd want to consider continuing to use it, and there's also maybe some reasons why we would not. There are host side implications of you have to scan for more things, but that's something we could overcome. There's also accessory information as part of a GAT service, and there's actually a UUID for that GAT service too, which we could reuse if we wanted to. We did add a protocol version into that accessory information, so we could tie that back to the DULT protocol version and have that numbering allow us, or the specification that allow us to do different things based on that. The other thing that's probably relevant is keeping the header really small was one of our early constraints or early design goals, because a large part of the Bluetooth advertising only being 37 bytes in total, including the MAC address. If you want to put a public diversified key with good security properties, you end up using a lot of that full MAC address or full advertisement payload. So we try to keep the header really, really tiny to allow for the payload to be flexible.
Great, thank you. So just two follow-ons from that. So it's great that we have the versioning in there. Have we done explicit tests with iOS, Android, other implementations of things that are using a different version, like an unspecified version, to make sure that nothing on the other devices around goes wrong when they start seeing DULT version 25 around them? I assume it should be okay, but how confident are we that we can use that experimentation space?
Great question. We have test cases that are supposed to cover that.
Great, that's awesome to hear. And if we ever did need to allocate new service IDs, what's the process like for that, and what would the working group have to do?
Yeah, my understanding is you go to the Bluetooth SIG and you request a new service data TLV. You pay some money. I think it's $2,500 or $3,500 in that range, and then you get a new one after a period of some weeks. The registry for those service data TLV UUIDs is managed by the Bluetooth SIG.
I know where I might get $2,500 to get one if we want one. So cool. All right, Nick, you're next in line.
Nick Doty, CDT, thanks for that overview. I am interested in this onboarding piece. Specifically, is this something to be standardized? Is this something that's going to be in that diagram that Rowan worked on, or is this just it's going to be proprietary per network, and we're just going to put some requirements on networks need to be able to get this information at some point?
This is still something under discussion. I would say some pieces of it are in the standard right now, and I guess goal is to have some standardization around it, so that we don't have to do custom implementation for different manufacturers. But I guess we will also want a contribution from manufacturers too in this process, right? We will hear from them, and if it turns out there are additional needs that we are not thinking about, we can include those also. So I guess this will be potentially a little bit of an iterative process, but overall, my thoughts are it should be in the spec. Brent, you have any thoughts?
I agree with everything you said. Yeah, we need to add it, and we're planning to add it.
Great, thanks.
All right, we have drained the queue. Thank you very much. I guess I just want to do a quick show of hands without using the tool. Who has read the updated version of the draft, which was the 01 from December? Okay, yeah. Okay, fair enough. I'm not typing it in, never mind. We're gonna move on to the next presentation. Thanks. It's just not that good. Alrighty, recommended next steps. All right, over to you.
Cool, thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, and for those of you in Brisbane, good morning and evening for everyone else. I'm Brent Sledvina. I work at Apple. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so excited that a couple BOF meetings we went through resulted in a IETF working group, and that we're here on the kickoff of that. I'm really excited about this work and looking forward to participating in this over the next few years. I'm going to talk today about an initial proposal on how to maybe take the work and break it into more bite-sized chunks, and also maybe where we can get started. So it's definitely hopefully going to be a bit more of a discussion. This is just a proposal that has a reasonable amount of thought behind it. Next slide, please. So the agenda that I'm going to cover it's pretty short. It's covering these 3 topics. So again, proposal to decompose the work into smaller bite-sized chunks. I don't think we want to create one massive document. So I'll talk a little bit more about how those could be smaller documents, more focused in different areas. Then a proposal on how to get started. I don't think we should write all of them in parallel. Maybe there's a few that we want to get started with first. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about encouraging engagement in non-technical communities and see what we want to do about that. Next slide, please. Very expansive and explicit diagram that Siddhika walked through. I am not going to spend much time on this besides the fact that there are numbers for each interface, protocol, capability, etc., 1 through 10. I refer to those in the next slide when I try to decompose or recommend a decomposition of the work into smaller documents. And let's just go to the next slide. This is more for completeness. All right, so here's a proposal, not wedded to this, but trying to get something started. Instead of 1 massive document, I was thinking maybe we could consider 4. 1 could be on the crowdsourced finding network architecture. That would cover items 1, 2, 9, and 10 on the previous slide. We have another line item in the charter on the unwanted tracking kind of reference or baseline algorithm. That could be a separate document. Covers item 3 in the previous slide. And then maybe the 3rd document would be a protocol between the accessories and nearby devices, including data formats. That would include items 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the previous slide. And then finally, it's clear we need an overall DULT threat model document, and that probably could be separate from the above ones. So next slide, please. And then how to get started. Again, I think we could take 2 of these. Upon consideration, maybe there's a 3rd, but let's, in this proposal, I have 2 written down. So my proposal, or the proposal, is take the existing internet draft that Siddhika walked through and kind of pull out the bits and pieces that are most valuable and most relevant and put that into document 3, the DULT data format document that also talks about the interaction between the accessories and the nearby devices. Some example sections from that existing internet draft that I think are relevant and helpful, again, as like starter sections for this document number 3 there's a whole section on terminology that kind of tries to clear up what we're talking about. We could hopefully reuse some or most of that. The advertisement format, again, is a great starting point. The MAC address and the behaviors of the MAC address, how it has to rotate, some very Bluetooth specific stuff on the types of MAC address to use. There's a lot of consideration that in the existing internet draft, along with some justifications as to why we chose to put certain things in there. I think that's a really good starting point. Then on accessory info, this would be everything from when you detect the accessory traveling with you, then you have to learn more about it. And this today includes things like the make and model of the accessory, the protocol version, the network ID it's running on, the capabilities it supports. Does it support play sound and NFC and Bluetooth? Serial number lookup, or does it just support something slightly different? And then finally, so the spec talks, the internet draft talks about both the commands and responses too, along with the formats for all that. And then finally, the other section I thought was most relevant to call up here as an example is the responses the commands and responses for non-owner finding. So what you need to start sound, stop sound, sound completion, how you might do Bluetooth identifier or serial number lookup over GAT, over Bluetooth GAT. Again, some good examples there and some thought put into that. There's probably other sections too, but I thought these are some of the good example ones to call up. So if we like this, recommend we publish this as a kind of the starter, the skeleton, as some might say, for the document number 3, and then ask the working group to adopt it. And of course, we would iterate and grow that document. Just want to throw out there that I think Apple and Google are happy to be authors. Welcome other authors too if people want to join, but we're happy to co-author this document. And then the second prong of, again, where I think we could get started is working on document number 1. Now, the reason I think document number 1, the crowdsourced finding network architecture document, is really important and important to do early in this process is it's been called out a number of times, and I fully agree with this statement. The reason unwanted tracking is a concern is because these crowdsourced finding networks work so well. So getting a really solid description of how that works, the crowdsourced finding network works, and having the privacy and security requirements of that, et cetera, really well documented, I think creates a good foundation for the working group to move forward.
All right, we got 2 in the queue if you're willing to take questions.
I think we should take questions because the next one is a little bit of a...
Let's go ahead.
Yep, great.
Hi, I'm Rowan May. So at the beginning of this session, near the beginning, we had a presentation with 3 use cases, and I'm sure there are plenty of other use cases. How does this proposed work plan, which of the use cases that we heard would be improved by which documents, and how does this mesh? Thanks.
Yeah, good question. I think if you go to the previous slide, what we talked about, what the second presentation talked about was really aspects of the threat model. And maybe there's scenarios in there that we want to talk about. So that would be document number 4, in my opinion. And as I was speaking through these slides and thinking about this and listening to the earlier presentation, it probably makes sense to do document 4 pretty early on in this process too, but maybe we could.
It's 4 documents. They're just not maybe numbered sequentially.
Yeah, exactly. There's no implied or explicit order or chronological order mentioned here beyond the fact that I wrote 4 bullets.
Yeah, right. Ecker?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Brent. We're probably closer together than anybody else in this room. If you're still in California. So I think which which document would specify? So I guess in the current AirTag design, right? There's a public key in the in the broadcast message, and then like in ARC9, you encipher the location of the public key. Which document set would you think would specify whatever took place of that, or was that, or whatever?
Probably document 1.
Okay.
Yeah, because document 1, I mean, the crowdsourced finding network needs to include some description of how you pair.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so I think this is a good decomposition, or reasonable decomposition at least. These cuts are never very clean, so I'm sure we'll find we have problems. I think I would prefer perhaps you don't want to use the word architecture here quite so much. And then, like, I must have some protocol too, and so I don't know, like, maybe we can live with architecture. We should have in mind that, like in this case, we have to specify like at least some wire format somewhere, and like what the mechanics are. So as long as that's the concept, it's totally fine.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Christine?
Hello. Hopefully my video is coming through.
Yep.
I just want to, I guess, kind of volunteer for document 1. I've done a lot of reverse engineering and research on the Find My framework. So I would love to contribute to that document, especially when it comes to endpoint authentication in a privacy preserving manner. I know that there's a lot of concerns about endpoint authentication, and then with that authentication, is whoever owns this protocol, Apple or whoever, able to track those end users? And so there are privacy preserving methodologies that can be used that both preserve the privacy of the endpoints, but then also prevent unauthenticated endpoints from leveraging that Find My protocol or any other crowdsourced protocol. So I think that's going to be a really important tenet for me in participating.
Awesome. We will note your name in the minutes. I would also like to note what I was going to say. It would be great if we could get somebody who's written a lot of RFCs to pair up with anybody who volunteered. And Christine Ecker threw his name in the ring. So yeah, so he put it in the note. He said, I'm also happy to help with document 1.
Yeah, I'm happy to pitch in if people want me.
Well, I mean, I think it's helped to press the buttons, do this, do that.
Yeah,
that's all I'm really looking for. So that's awesome. Thanks. Great.
Thank you.
Wild success, because that's what I was afraid that no one was going to want to volunteer. Awesome. All right, so I was just going to go on to the last slide there, or the next slide.
Yeah, that sounds great, Sean. So last thing I wanted to touch base on is I've heard, and I know a number of people have heard concerns both within IETF and in other discussions with advocacy groups, gender-based violence groups, domestic abuse groups, etc. That and we heard a bit today too, that the non-technical communities are super interested in engaging in this work. They would love to participate. They'd love to help out. They'd love to influence it. But the fact that they're not super technical has maybe discouraged or not well encouraged people to participate. It's a challenge. You look at the current internet draft. It's very, very detailed, very specific. Because we wrote it more to the point of making sure accessory makers can build something that works and written it for that audience. But it is not for not easy to digest if you're non-technical. So this is more of a, hey, brainstorm. Just want to have a few starter ideas on how to best engage and make sure that whatever we're producing is digestible, able to be improved upon, critiqued, etc. by everyone who's interested in this area. Maybe there could be a separate document explaining concerns around gender-based violence, etc. Maybe that's the threat model document, but maybe that's an addendum. We could add explicit considerations to all the documents to kind of clarify what we mean by some of the technical language. We could even have a primer that kind of explains all this stuff in a little bit less hyper-technical jargon to kind of facilitate engagement and help make sure people understand some of the nuts and bolts. I want to open this one up though. This is just a starter, and I've got a dog that absolutely needs to go outside, so I'm going to come right back in 30 seconds.
You do that. I can ad lib to see if somebody comes back or somebody else gets in line. my idea here is that some people have volunteered earlier and they're going to help. We're going to use a Rolodex from Erica. We've got this GitHub repo that we'll be able to not only store internet drafts that use Martin Thompson's cool template. We'll be able to actually put other things in there that can do translations from nerd speak to regular people speak, and put pictures and training and all kinds of other things in there. And so I'm hoping that we can leverage the community to come help and do the translation for us. But that's kind of my plan, is that if we can have one central place that we could do this, that would be great. And not everything has to end up in an internet draft, but it does help to put some of it there. But I do think you're right that engaging with the wider community to actually get input is one of the things that's in our charter. And so we are going to lay in there. And I see Mallory's in the queue, and Erica, I don't know, it might be super late where you're at. So if you want to jump in and add some more, feel free to as well.
Yeah,
Mallory?
yeah. I just wanted to say, oh, sorry. I do want to just say here that there has been some work done to start some more plain language, like information to really engage the broader community of victim service advocates and help them really think through the scenarios. I mean, they're seeing this happen, but getting them to understand the work of this space. That there has been some work done to create some of the documents, and I think that can also help with document number 4.
Mallory?
Yeah, thanks for all the presentations. And I wanted to jump in on this just for folks' awareness. In the Human Rights Protocol Considerations Research Group, there's a document on the broader issue of tech-assisted intimate partner violence that may be overlapping a little bit with the plans here. So I'm just encouraging folks to check that out to see if it fits. I mean, I actually came with a question, which is what's in scope and what's not. I think it's really important to engage communities from outside the IETF on this. I think the work done to do this so far has been really great, and I'm so happy to see it, and I hope it can continue to expand. But at what point do we sort of diverge from the goal, which is to make sure the standardization happens, and also support the resources and clinics and other places out in the real world that are building these tools, and rather point to those and try to exchange that dialogue. So I guess I'm just asking, like, where are we going to draw the line between creating these documents as part of the actual working group that's happening here, rather than doing it in other contexts? And then, just specifically wanted to point to some of the work that's already happened in the IETF related to that you could reference. Thanks.
So I guess my off the knee-jerk reaction is it's going to be a work in progress. We got to get started and then figure out where the boundaries go. So I'm hoping to not step on too many toes and take what we can and move from there. Nick?
Yeah, I think Erica already mentioned the sort of input side, that there has been some work by advocates and others to help them to try to have places to gather input so that we can get some of that data in a sort of safe way. But I think Brent is also bringing up this idea of like the output side. How can the working group like translate it back to the outside? And I do think that is just kind of a new that's a new way to think about that. And certainly to get the input effective, you're going to need some maybe not the most high fidelity, but we need some version of that output. W3C has used explainer documents. I don't think that's necessarily to reach non-technical communities, but it is often a sort of translation down to an easier thing to read. So maybe we should be thinking about, yeah, each time we publish a new revision, we also try to publish the plain language, a plain language explanation of it. That sounds hard, but maybe also worth trying.
I'm not sure how well the IETF will do that, but we can certainly try to take a stab at it. I mean, at the end of the day, we have done, explainers, blog posts. I'm looking at you, Greg. and other things to try to do things. But I'm also kind of hoping to rely on some of the, companies in here that have people who do this professionally, and maybe they can come and help do that kind of stuff too. Because at the end of the day, you do want to show that you're moving the needle and trying to reduce harm. So I think that would be good. All right, I got 2 more slides. We drained the queue. Let's go to the next one. Is that all right, Brent?
The last 2 slides are
just
just
questions. Yeah.
questions, and thank you.
Sorry, I ended that early. Maggie.
Hi, yeah. So I was just wondering if we could talk about kind of the order of operations and dependencies, because I think that it's going to be hard to be able to say how some of the architecture should be designed, or the tracking element should be designed, or the protocol should be designed. You don't have the threat model yet. So I was just also kind of a point of information, like how other working groups have handled this in the past, because I don't think it makes sense for everyone to stall while we try to make a document. But also you want to make sure that you don't get too far down and then it's hard to change it, because it's kind of, people have put a lot of work into it.
So the IETF does it many different ways, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. There's oftentimes they'll go through the whole process of doing, the full up engineering approach, where we'll do use cases and then requirements and the design a protocol. Then you find out the protocol doesn't meet all the requirements, and you got to go back and change the use cases, and the requirements get changed. Sometimes they just do the protocol. So I do think you're right. Like I think the idea is that we will probably try to launch off and go forward and try to, at the end of the day, we have to have something down for document number 4 before we can make sure that 1, 2, and 3 make any sense. So while I don't think it's a gating function, I think we can get up and move out. And the idea is that the author teams of these documents are all working together in this working group, and we're all communicating effectively as possible. And we basically just try to make the best of a, rolling herd of IETFers writing documents. So that's I think we can't do 1, 2, and 3 and then do 4 at the end. Like 4 has to come somewhere at the very beginning. And I knew that was going to get people in line. So great. Ecker, do you want to add something?
I think roughly what you said is the only real way to proceed. I guess I would add that we already have like a bunch of materials already been written, and some protocols that are in fact are to some extent very widely deployed, to some extent deployed. That is, by which I mean I don't know exactly how much the existing deployments conform with the specification we have in front of us. So I think there are perhaps 2 ways in which the specifications can be improved. One is maybe there are things specification does that are bad and we should stop doing them, and the other thing is maybe the specification doesn't do things or is insufficient in some way. It would be great, I think, to identify the areas in which specifications are bad and stop doing them as soon as we possibly can, and then if we can identify roughly the areas where we think it's maybe insufficient and we're going to need to create some space as well. But I think that I suspect much of the sort of overall structure of the specifications will stick around, and so that probably needs some refinement. So I think there's plenty of work to do. But as sort of Maggie said, it's important to be agile in case we discover like later on that we're doing something insufficient. But I don't think there's like a dearth of work to do in the short term.
All right, Tommy Polly Apple. Yeah, so thanks to Maggie for bringing up this overall point about ordering. I agree with what I've heard so far that the threat model matters before we can ship anything. We should start it now. It doesn't block anything, and particularly, I think we can look at other examples of work in the IETF that have been successful, where you have a starting product. I'm thinking of Quick here, right? Like someone came in with a protocol that worked, didn't have all the properties, but it was like a thing that you could run. And then over time, it evolved into something that achieved the same goals, had a much more robust threat model and other things taken into account with it, and ended up being kind of totally different than the first thing, but also spiritually the same, and it evolved over time. So I think we could have a similar thing here, where we have our initial work, we take the pieces we think are the right starting place, but we expect that they will be molded along with the threat model document and others over time. And it'd be nice, since there is a precedent here of existing tracker networks and people able to run a version of DULT, to be able to do incremental changes to that protocol, to at each stage have something that people can continue to test and continue to validate and see how effective is this thing beyond just theoretically what is the threat model.
Just for those who don't remember, the very first decision that the IETF made about Quick was to change the orderingness of the Indians so that they were completely interoperable on day 0. So, not interoperable.
All right, Stephen, on that point about drafts, if somebody has to spend $2,500 for each internet draft, that would be kind of funny. But so what I got to say is on the idea of the scenarios feeding into the threat model document. I don't know if the people who wrote the scenarios text also have some ideas about what would reduce the harm. If it was, if they were happy to kind of write text about that as well, that might be useful, because it could be that some engineers will say, I made this protocol change that reduces the harm, and the people who know about the scenarios might not agree.
Oh no, they volunteered. They didn't know it. They volunteered to help that. So.
No, but I think the scenarios presented earlier were very good, but there was no text, at least so far, saying, and here's what a less harmful scenario, or here's how that scenario could be improved from a human point of view, as opposed to just from a tweaking a protocol point of view.
DKG?
Hi, I'm a little bit concerned about questions about evolution for this protocol, given that we're talking about both the Bluetooth frames and also the behavior of the, I think they're calling them finder devices in the diagram. Rolling out changes to the finder devices and rolling out changes to the firmware, these are all things that have significant staggered deployment scenarios. So I just want to flag that, like, we were pretty cavalier about, let's evolve quick. That was dealing with browsers and web servers mainly. And there's a pretty clear, straightforward migration deprecation model there. And this doesn't smell the same to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong.
Oh, you took yourself out. All right, Jesse?
Can people hear me this time?
Yep.
Oh, good. So I just wanted to briefly address the question of the participant who was asking about the scenarios and suggestions for what would ameliorate them since I wrote the scenarios. I talked a little bit about this in the chat sidebar, but I know that there's tons of comments going by. I think the point of the scenarios to a large degree is to get people thinking about how to adapt threat modeling methods to this particular space, much like in the data privacy world. They kind of took concepts of things like persona-based threat modeling from traditional cybersecurity, and figured out how to adapt them to the data privacy space. So now those tools exist, and I think that kind of approach, persona-based threat modeling, security cards, this has potential for this kind of question. While I have read through some of the draft proposals on these topics and do have some technical thoughts on them, I think that that's outside of the scope of this initial discussion, because I think to such a large degree we have to start by understanding what the threat landscape is and being able to think creatively about this domain that maybe a lot of people are not used to thinking about when they think about privacy and security and safety.
Thanks. Tell me, Polly.
Hi, I just got up to respond to DKG about I think my comments for the evolution of the protocol. So yeah, what I was imagining was referring back to when I asked questions earlier, and Brent said, "Oh, we have some unit tests, or like a test lab," like not actually trying to update the whole Finder networks for every draft version or anything, but if people are doing some tests with some fake devices to see, can I model this out? Can I do things as we have different versions of the spec going along? We can do testing there, and we can imagine that evolving. I'm guessing the actual big networks are just going to like have what they're doing today as this initial proprietary version, and then there will be some big switch at the end of the day to the standard version. But in between, we should be able to do some simulations, models, other tests that don't actually involve updating everyone's tracker devices.
Brent, I think you might get the last word here.
Yeah, oh, not intentionally, but thanks. I also want to underscore what DKG said. Firmware update for accessories can be very quick. There's also exceptionally long tails. If you happen to lend something to someone and it's in a, it's in a faraway place from your device, or it's up at your second home, or whatever, or just that don't come in contact very often, we see very long tails in those firmware update processes. And then more so on the crowdsourcing finding network side, the performance of those networks is directly proportional to the number of devices that support the particular protocol that you're using. So you could easily imagine years if you did a whole hog switch from one protocol to another to get to the level where you wouldn't have a substantial regression in end user performance for the people that just want to find their stuff. So those are very important concerns for this working group to consider.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've drained the queue. We got a plan to go forward. We'll circle with people who have volunteered, and we will get going on that. I don't know if you want to add anything additional, Erica?
Thank you. I guess, as a closing, I just want to say thank you for a really good first conversation. There is clearly a lot to talk about here. I think it's always important to kind of, on a note, to just pull us back for just a hot second and just see the bigger picture here, because there are so many details to be figured out. But this will be very significant for survivors. This has been a long-standing issue. It's a consistent and very common issue. There's many different types of scenarios, but we know how serious this is. And in the world of domestic violence and stalking and sexual violence, we know the statistics. We know that stalking, severe assaults, homicide, these are things that increase significantly at the moment that somebody is trying to leave and separate from an abusive person. And so for survivors that are like really concerned for their safety, feeling like somebody can monitor them and find their location is incredibly terrifying. And so I just want to acknowledge that and say that I am really grateful to all of the minds putting your energy and your expertise into this conversation to figure out how we address these concerns. I just think it's important to say that.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And that brings us to a close. Looking forward to seeing you all in Vancouver and on the internet. Ciao. And thanks to Mike O for taking notes. Well, no, I remember you used to come in and you would